I want to thank, KPMG. They are our sponsor for the entire convening series. And for today's series, Egon Zehnder is our presenting partner for this session. So without delay for today, we're going to start by hearing from Al Prieto, who's managing partner in New York. He's New York and partner of the board and CEO practice at Egon Zehnder. We asked him to join us to give us a little bit of a landscape of where in the search space, both company searches and private equity searches, to give us a little bit of an update, and then we will get our panel started. So without much ado, Al, please join us, and we look forward to your remarks. Al?
Thanks for the introduction, Esther, and thanks to you and Jose for inviting us to kick off the session. Pleased to join you guys again. I've seen several familiar faces, so it's great to be with you again. I thought I'd kick things off talking a bit about the board landscape and what we're seeing, certainly over the last 6 months or 7 months since COVID. And then also certainly the impact on what we're seeing in terms of the social unrest we see in the United States. And look at drawing some parallels between public company board service and what we're seeing in public company board space, drawing parallels with what we're seeing in the private equity segment. And you have obviously individuals that are much more expert than me to talk on that in depth, but we can sort of share what our perspective is working with many of the major firms. And also talk about differences between serving on a public equity portfolio board and public board service. So with just starting that, what we've seen first of all with COVID, not similar to some aspects of our business and also more broadly business, is that the demand for board talent actually has increased. We've seen our activity in the boardroom actually go up after COVID. There's a lot of factors contributing to this. Part of it is that actually capacity of directors. The demand certainly on public and private boards, given the current volatile environment, have only gone up. And so you'll see directors that sit on multiple boards decide to step off of a board before they had actually planned to do so. And so we see an increase, if you will, in terms of board seats that become available, board turnover. The other thing that we've seen certainly is a large macro trend is previously diversity in the boardroom has been defined as female diversity. And there's been a lot of progress made in that regard, which is great, and will continue to have progress. But typically, our clients have had less of a focus on ethnic or racial diversity. That has changed dramatically, particularly in the United States since May. And so we see this being a continuing trend. LCDA is part of the mission of LCDA is part of supporting and driving that trend. And we're seeing that actually not just in the public board space, but also in private equity as well. So I'll go really quickly into, so oftentimes people are thinking, how do I get engaged with the board? Traditionally, much like public boards, private equity portfolio boards were filled through connections of the directors or management team. And that's similar, it was very similar in the public space. But now there's an increasing awareness that organizations need to go beyond their networks, because what it results going through networks tends to happen is that you gather more people that look like you to sit on the boards. And there's an increasing awareness that that doesn't lead to an ideal board composition, and doesn't contribute as optimally as it could to guiding the business and business performance. There's certainly in the private equity area, we've seen increased pressure by LPs and other institutions to again ask for diverse representation on boards, and that's certainly driving some of the things that we see. And one of the things that's actually very common, both in the public and private space, is we're seeing an openness now to look at executives with profiles that go beyond the traditional board profile, which is a CEO or CFO profile, and looking at other C-suite executives, sometimes N-1 level executives. A common theme, both with private equity, and I could say previously it was not as much of a focus, certainly in mid to large cap boards, is that boards want individuals that are current in the business space or in the space or a relevant space that that the business operates in. In the public arena, what that's led to is a real demand for active executives and or recently retired, and also an openness to go beyond that CEO or CFO to the C-suite that I mentioned. Now, in private equity, there is that same and even more intense demand of that the director adds something, brings something to the table in terms of understanding the market. Now, maybe an obvious difference, but one I'll just share is that though for active executives, that is obviously from a conflict perspective, makes it challenging to serve sometimes on a private equity portfolio board if it's close to the space that you know. So that's one difference. Another difference that we see, and that can be actually something that directors that we work with that have a mix of public boards and private boards that they serve on, is that in private boards, oftentimes there's an opportunity to work a bit more closely with management, and sometimes even interface a little bit with customers and such. So that's something that we found that the private equity directors that we know really enjoy. So I thought that I'd give you a snapshot of the landscape. Listen, this discussion from our perspective it's never been a time more relevant than now to have the dialogue. So thanks again for having me join.
Thank you, Al. Thank you. And that was really helpful. So now it's my pleasure to introduce our panel. Our moderator is Professor Jose Alvarez. He's a senior lecturer at business administration at the Harvard Business School. He's an LCDA member, as a former CEO of Stop and Shop companies, among others. He serves as a director on United Rentals. And then our distinguished panel is, I'm going to start with Wes Bielek, and I want to make sure that Wes, you can correct me if I got close.
You're pretty close, closer than my wife gets, so you're in a good spot.
Well, can you say it?
Bielek.
Okay, good. Fantastic. Wes Bielek, Managing Director, U.S. Buyout Corporate Private Equity at Carlyle, and he's a director with Novolex and a former director at Exalta Coding Systems, among others. We have Nancy Ford, Managing Director, Private Equity at KKR, and she's a director on Upfield, Nature Bounty, Channel Controls Merchants, again, among others. And our third panelist is David Trujillo. He is a partner with TPG, and he's a director on Cirque du Soleil, Univision Communications, RCN Telecom, again, among others. So what a distinguished panel for today's very important conversation. Professor Alvarez, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Esther, and thank you, Al, very much for kicking things off. I want to thank the panelists, Nancy, David, and Wes, for being with us here this afternoon. I think this will be a wonderful discussion. I know that the three of you are incredibly busy and have lots going on, so it's really gratifying that you're here supporting LCDA. So thank you all three very much. If we look at the numbers, the top 10 private equity groups in the world over the last few months since March have announced more than $40 billion in new deals. And based on available capital that the firms have, because there's a lot of capital out there right now, there's a recognition that private equity is going to play a really important outsized role in the economic recovery that is ahead of us here. And while the world has been dealing with COVID and trying to recover from the pandemic, corporate America, as Al mentioned before, is undergoing a reckoning and having to deal with the legacy of racism and systemic racism that has played out since the George Floyd killing. Private equity has added its voice to those who's condemned structural racism, and private equity wields a lot of power when it comes to diversity. However, the industry also has been a laggard over the years in terms of inclusion for women and underrepresented minorities. LCDA, as Esther mentioned, launched its first panel to discuss diversity on PE boards in 2018. And we thought it would be appropriate to bring some people back together today to see what is happening in terms of diversity in private equity. And so we have these three great representatives from prominent private equity groups that can talk to us a little bit about what their organizations are doing as umbrella companies, and then what their portfolio companies are doing relative to diversity. Before we get started on the diversity discussion, I thought it would be useful to have a little bit of background, just a minute or two from each of the panelists to talk a little bit about their careers, career trajectories, and maybe an anecdote that could help us understand how your career trajectories have helped you through this pandemic, which I think will be sort of interesting. So Nancy, can we start with you? If you can give us a little bit of background, just so that we know you a little bit better, other than where you are, kind of name, rank, and serial number, sorts of things, and get us started here. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Jose. First of all, I just want to thank you all for inviting me. I'm really excited to be here. It's an important conversation, and I'm excited to be a part of it, and really looking forward to getting to know all of you. So thank you. As Esther said, I'm a managing director at KKR. I'm part of our consumer retail team, and I head up our consumer products investing. I've actually been at KKR for 3.5 years, so didn't start my career here. Maybe just to give you a little bit of context for how my career evolved, I got my start in investment banking at Goldman Sachs, was an analyst there for a couple of years, and then got exposed to private equity after that, working at Thomas H. Lee Partners in Boston for a couple of years. Came out to the West Coast and never left, to go to Stanford Business School, where I went with David Trujillo, one of our other panelists here. And then coming out of business school, I ended up, I'd kind of been at a larger fund, ended up deciding to join a much, much smaller fund. At the time, it was a $300 million fund and a first-time fund. And a big reason that I did that, the main reason I did that, was the people, the group of people that I was joining and would be working with. And I'll come back to that as a theme in a second. But I spent 14 years at FFL Partners. And over time, we raised 3 successive funds, increasingly larger funds. And I was a big part of helping to grow and build that firm. I had a really unique opportunity to join KKR a few years ago, and it was an incredible opportunity to join somebody who the co-head of America's private equity in our fund is somebody that I had known for 20 years and had a long-term relationship with, and felt like the combination of the job opportunity, the platform that KKR has, which is absolutely incredible, both in terms of the capabilities, the people, and the opportunity that it presented to me. And I'd say joining a partnership with people that I really respected and trusted, and that was a huge part of my decision as well. And it's, I'd say over my career, something that I've always prioritized and that has been really important, in particular going through COVID, is just working with great people and partnering with people that I know and trust, that I have trust in both their capabilities in terms of what they're doing in their jobs, but also are good, solid people that will take into account not only the business side of the equation, but the people side of the equation. And it mattered a lot to be surrounded in terms of the executives we partnered with, in terms of the KKR team, our other board members. It mattered a lot as we were making these important decisions with minimal information at the beginning of COVID, to feel like there was a lot of trust in the room and that we all had the same goals of doing the right thing for the business and doing the right thing for the people. So I'd say that that's been a common theme, and it's something that's worked well for me in my career and is an important part of my decisions along the way.
Great, thank you, Nancy. That's very interesting and I think incredibly helpful to the group here. David, can we go to you next?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Appreciate the invitation to be with you today. By way of personal background, for my last name, my family's from Colombia, South America. My parents and my sister were born there. Both my parents went to medical school there, ended up doing their residencies and specializations at Northwestern in Chicago, which is how I ended up being born in Chicago and raised there. On the career front today, I've been at TPG now for 15 years, helping lead up our technology, media, telecom investing efforts globally. The prior 8 I'd spent at a private equity fund in Chicago by the name of GTCR. So I've been doing TMT private equity now for over 20 years, investment banking for a short time before that. And Nancy touched on this, of what a unique kind of environment we're in with respect to COVID, and how, for all of us, it's having a variety of personal and professional impacts. On the professional side, this is, having now lived through a few cycles from, what happened in 2000, 2001 in terms of the internet bubble, then 08, 09, the great financial crisis, to now, everything is caused for a different reason. I would say one interesting observation, though, at least for me, is just how quickly the markets, notwithstanding Main Street, but how quickly the markets have tended to rebound. And I think that's a byproduct to get through, not only the direct impacts of COVID, but the indirect recession as a result. And, I think the analogy we're using internally is kind of operating in a wartime economy, which for many of us, we've never experienced that in terms of a domestic war. But when you think about how long-lived this could be in terms of the impacts, and what happens in a war of, there are some industries that benefit heavily and some that don't, and really trying to spend the time of, if this is going to be a prolonged impact, where do we lean in versus where do we lean back, particularly relative to 0% interest rates in what is a very high-priced environment today. But look forward to getting into more of these topics, as well as the topic at hand of diversity, which is core to our heart at TPG. But Jose, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you, David. Really helpful. That idea of the wartime economy, I think, is something we can come back to here in the discussion. I think quite important. Wes, again, good afternoon. Maybe we can hear a little bit from you.
Sure. Well, first, echo both Nancy and David's comments. Greatly appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all, and hopefully at some point network with many of you as well. So thank you for having me. I've been at Carlyle now for a little over 12 years. I'm in our industrial practice of our large cap US buyout fund. Based here in Washington, D.C., actually from this area originally on the Maryland side. Growing up, I lived in a bunch of different places. My stepfather was in the military. And so change was a constant theme, throughout my early childhood and early adulthood as well. I actually started, or was slated to start, my career in the late 90s, early 2000s for a high-flying investment bank at the time called Robertson Stephens, which I know Nancy and David will know well. And unfortunately for that, for that institution, with the internet bubble, that did not work out very well. And so from a career perspective, pivoted quickly to a smaller investment bank, kind of based down in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, and from there transitioned on to a middle market focused private equity firm before joining Carlyle about 12 years ago. And so from my both personal experience and career experience, I would say, anecdotally, things I've taken from that would certainly be that, change is an uncontrollable constant, and certainly never prepared specifically for for a pandemic. But I know that many of you have seen change, experienced and driven change a lot in your experiences, and know that how you navigate and how you adapt to that change, really is what helps you evolve in these wartime economies or whatever environment you find yourself in. So thanks for having me. I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Wes. Appreciate your comments. We're going to start by talking a little bit about what each of your firms is doing relative to diversity and what kinds of initiatives you're taking there. I know that there are several of your firms have made statements and set targets recently to address diversity. And as an outgrowth of that commitment to inclusion, companies across the U.S. are focusing on diversity, especially as they come under scrutiny for lack of women and underrepresented minorities in top roles. According to a recent ISS report, 84% of Russell 3000 companies have no ethnically or racially diverse people serving the top 5 positions in their company, and private equity firms are no different really in lack of diversity. So I'd like to get a sense from the 3 of you, what are your companies doing? And Wes, maybe we could start with you. What's Carlyle doing in terms of its commitments to diversity within its ranks, including the commitment recently to interview at least one Black, Latinx, Pacific Islander or Native American candidate for each open role? Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And
Sure. It really starts from a place and a belief that diverse teams lead to better performance. We've seen that in our portfolio companies, as I'm sure Nancy and David have looked at and seen as well. And so it starts from a place of we want to diversify because it improves performance. And from that, I would say probably about 18 months ago, and Esther, probably maybe even shortly after the last panel that you referenced. Institutionally, we put in a rule that you had to, for any open role within Carlyle, there was a process to ensure that you interview at least, 2 diversity candidates, and diversity defined as not only racial diversity, but gender diversity as well. But what we saw, and Al, going back to your points about some of the progress that's been made, certainly with regards to gender diversity, is that the slates and the people that we were interviewing with these positions tended to quickly skew heavily female, which is certainly not a bad thing. And we've seen great progress on that front. But what we weren't really picking up that racial diversity wasn't having the intended consequence, or the outcomes that we were looking for with regards to racial diversity. And so, what we did was we added, an additional election that you wanted to make sure that of those 2, at least one of them needs to not only be a gender diverse individual, but a racially diverse individual as well. And so that's kind of how that, how that's evolved. And we did that, probably 6 or 7 months ago. And so early signs have been positive, but still certainly a work under development. And I would say, policies like this are, one of several tools that I think we're trying to use to reach the objective, which is a more diverse workforce, not only in our boards, but, within Carlyle itself. I mean, other examples of things that we're trying to do. There's a diversity, equity, and inclusion council that actually reviews for every internal hire, managing director hire, to make sure, they're not saying, yes, this person is good or no, this person is bad, but they're making sure a process was followed so that, diverse talent, was contacted, reached out to, and 2, really given, the opportunity, to develop and find those. Other tools would be digital tools. I think one of the benefits of COVID certainly is that without traveling to always have to meet somebody, it lets you talk and network with a lot more people. And so trying to use those digital tools in our hiring practices. We actually have an investment in a company called HireVue that helps use AI and computer-driven technology to interview folks, and we've seen a lot of adoption on that. Are using it ourselves internally as well. And then finally, really trying to expand the schools from which we recruit. And we found that when you tend to recruit and from a small number of schools, and you just reinforcing the existing networks that you have. And so this is an ongoing, development that we're really trying to explore and bring that to bear, is to expand those networks, because a lot of our existing networks, today, frankly, just don't have the depth in them in terms of gender and racial diversity that we're looking for to fill the ranks. And so we're trying to use tools such as that as well.
Wes, where are you seeing the greatest success in this work, and where do you see the biggest challenges? Like what things have really helped you get some traction, and what things are still challenging and a work in progress?
I think the senior ranking folks, we've seen, I would say, probably less success there, and a lot of it driven by many of the senior folks come up within the ranks. And so there's a pipeline and a funnel concept that you have to start. And when you start developing talent, diverse talent early in your organization, then you're more likely to have diverse talent in the senior levels of your organization. And so there's a plan and a strategy to do that. But from an external perspective, you're just not bringing in that many people. So there's less of an opportunity to change your real senior leadership of your firm if you don't have the pipeline and are developing that from within. So there's a strategy there, but it takes time to develop, and it takes persistence.
Okay, interesting. And one of the issues that you run into is the progress looks slow when that is the case, right? Because you're moving people up through the ranks. It takes time for them to get to those top positions, and you're trying to get people that fit within your culture, and having people get acculturated, it could take a while. So that's always a significant issue, I think. Nancy, KKR has made its own commitments to diversity. What's KKR doing in terms of broadening their networks and trying to be more inclusive?
Yeah, well, so I would start by describing this, and we always describe it this way, as a journey. And it's an acknowledgement that we're heading in the right direction, but it's going to take a while to get there. And I think we find a similar issue to what Wes described. You want to change it overnight, and it's very hard. You have to do it in a way that fits with your organization. So what I would say is that it is a huge priority for KKR. I mean, it has the focus of the senior leadership of the firm, and we are constantly trying new ways to improve upon these efforts. And I'll just touch on a little bit of our journey so far and kind of what we've done and what progress we've made, and then kind of where we're going. So I'd say the journey really began in 2014, and that's when KKR established its Inclusion and Diversity Council. And I think, again, you have to start at the top of an organization, and it has to be something that's embraced and supported by the senior leadership of any company in order for it to then trickle down throughout the organization. That was a moment in time when the senior leadership just said, we are making a commitment to inclusion and diversity. And again, similar to what Wes said, I think there's a recognition that it's not only is it the right thing to do, it also will lead to better results for our firm. So it serves a dual purpose. And I'd say that we hired a senior HR person at KKR in 2015 to really drive this. I think not only does it need backing of senior people, it needs somebody whose job it is to drive this and to work within the organization. And I'd say we are all held to diversity goals within our teams. And it varies a little bit by team and varies a bit based on where we're all starting, but it's something we all talk about and we commit to goals as, you know, smaller teams of people, and our consumer retail team is committed to that. One of the things we've also done is really expand our hiring sources. And I think, I mean, it sounds like Carlisle's done a great job of expanding in terms of the schools that they go to. Some of the things that we've done, we have established a summer associate program that is really geared toward women and minorities. That doesn't mean we can't hire men out of it, but the focus is really to source talent from top business schools to be summer associates. We also have just started a program where we're going straight to undergrad. And again, we think that will enable us to find more diverse talent, as opposed to, you know, typically as we're hiring junior people out of associate programs, or sorry, analyst programs at investment banks. And I think already you start with a less diverse population. So we're going a bit younger, and we've just started that program. Then I'd say we've also really tried to partner with organizations that can help us access diverse talent and be feeders for diverse talent. So, I mean, there's probably 7 or 8 organizations that we've partnered with to help source junior diverse talent, including SEO and an organization, investment firm called Harlem Capital Partners. And there are many at Toigo, many others. And we're constantly, you know, trying to source talent there. We also internally have training on inclusion and diversity. I think there's an education process that's required. It's not only around the importance of diversity, but we want to make sure once people get to KKR, if they don't, you know, look like the majority of people at the firm, we want to make sure that they're embraced and that there's an education process to make sure that we create an environment where more diverse talent can thrive. And I'd say there are many kind of work streams, and there are a lot of things that we're constantly trying because we want to continue to expand this effort. We have made a lot of progress, but there's a long way to go. And I similar to what Wes said, it takes longer on the senior side, but it's a goal and we'll get there. And then I'd say one of the other things we've really focused on is what we can do within our portfolio companies. And we set a goal probably a year plus ago to have 2 diverse board members on every portfolio company board where in the US, where we have control of the business and therefore can set the board. And I'm very happy to say that we achieved that a few months ago. And it really wasn't that hard to do. And we found some amazing board members that are going to be so additive to our portfolio companies. And it just took setting the goal and having the senior leadership of KKR saying, you will do this. And we all did it. And we're really excited. And again, we found some fantastic board members. I'd say we also are trying to find the right way to support our portfolio companies in their own diversity journeys. And we don't take a we try not to be too forceful in anything in terms of how we work with our portfolio companies. It's a partnership approach. We need to take a bespoke approach with each of them. But we try to support them in every way we can in one, reinforcing the importance of diversity. And we're demonstrating that with who we've added to the board, but talking about it, starting the conversation. And I think, we've also tried to support our portfolio companies with resources. We just, in the last week, had an inclusion and diversity tutorial, and we've sent materials and also did a Zoom call with all our portfolio companies just to support them and educate them. So we're doing everything we can there to give them the opportunity to drive diversity in their own companies in the way that makes sense.
Thank you, Nancy. David, what's happening at TPG on this front?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're going to hear a lot of similarities. And so, I'll touch on some of the some of these. One, it starts with data collection and transparency. For us, we made board diversity a key mandate of the firm in 2017. Since then, we've added, I think the number is 92 women to our boards. And so now we're approaching about 100%, women on our boards. Now, that being said, every year we continue to push that beyond just gender diversity to ethnic diversity, LGBTQ, and that's going to be, as Nancy points out, a journey. I think the second thing that sounds comparable at Carlyle and KKR is just, it's accountability. So once you have data and transparency, you then are able to hold yourself to a standard. And for us, that flows through in terms of compensation now, where business unit leaders and partners of the firm, part of their compensation is based on how successful they've been on diversity efforts, not only in their boards, but also in terms of our own hiring. And there, similar to what Wes said, I think over the past couple of years, our key intake funnel as a firm is the associate class. So it's people generally coming out of investment banks and consulting firms. And for the past couple of years, we've been at 50% diverse in those classes. And one thing I'd point out, Jose, you said, well, look, that takes time. What's interesting about our industry is, for better or for worse, there's not many 50 or 60-year-olds running around doing private equity.
Sure.
Our average age at TPG has got to be south of 40. I'm not exactly sure what it is, but with that type of young firm, it doesn't take very long for the demographics to change pretty quickly. This isn't a place where people stay through to, a pension at 65. And so I'd at least be more optimistic that with 50% of our firm's intake looking very different than it did several years ago, we're going to look markedly different as an industry in 5 to 10 years. I think the other thing we've done that I know KKR and Carlyle have done is just partnerships with the LCDA, SEO Group, things like Ascend Pinnacle for Asian Americans, things like the Board Diversity Alliance. And that, I think, is very helpful in terms of growing our networks and having an intake of other diverse candidates. And maybe the last thing I'll mention, just to extend on it, because I think this is what makes it more tangible and real and really sets the importance of this, at least to our firm and our investment professionals, is we set up affinity groups a number of years ago, and everybody at the firm is encouraged to join an affinity group, whether it's the Hispanics affinity group, Black affinity group, LGBTQ, you name it. And these affinity groups are constantly hosting events, which we call Talks at TPG. So, to kick off Hispanic Heritage Month, last month, I interviewed a data scientist on the COVID impact on the Hispanic community in the US. Jim Coulter, our co-founder and CEO, is interviewing Lonnie Bunch who's the Secretary of the Smithsonian, on preserving minority history in America. And so for Hispanic Heritage Month, we have a series of programs. When we were back in the office, the other thing we would do is we'd alternate the artwork. So for Hispanic Heritage Month, we'd have a Hispanic art take over. We would change the food options. We'd host kind of food and cocktail hours that are, somewhat thematic. And that, I think, has a way of just permeating the importance of diversity in a much more real daily way. In addition to that, I remember after the murder of George Floyd, we ended up offering to our employee base, hey, let's have, just panel discussions to talk about social injustice and its impact on the workplace. We ended up having over 30 panel discussions of just TPG employees. And so I think that, that type of employee engagement makes a difference. Another thing is starting to use our balance sheet in terms of our own capital allocation. We've started to seed minority private equity and venture firms, including Harlem Capital, most recently focused on minority founders. And then ultimately, and I think it helps in some regard, I think, being in San Francisco, but we've not been shy of taking advocacy positions, which I think is unique for private equity, where we've been outspoken on behalf of LGBTQ rights, DACA, and other social matters that I think put us out there more and just let it be known to not only our employee base, but everyone within our network of how meaningful and important these issues are.
Thank you, David. Really helpful commentary all around. One of the things that really struck me, though, in all of this is Nancy's comment about having people feeling included when they come in as associates. Because one of the things that I find with many of the Latino students that I advise that go into private equity is they leave fairly soon because they do not feel included. So having that sort of support and structure that makes people in the organization aware of this issue, I think is important. Because David, you're right. The longevity of people in the firm generally is shorter because of the nature of the industry. But if people are churning disproportionately in one group at the associate level because they don't feel included, that could be quite a significant barrier to getting to a better place. We focus mostly on the associate level. I think it'd be important to talk a little bit about board membership on your portfolio companies. We've got a great cohort of potential Latino board members here on our call. I think there are over 50 people. So it'd be helpful to spend a little bit of time talking about what it's like to be on a private company board versus a public company board for those in the audience who haven't had that experience. So David, maybe we can go back to you again, and you can talk to us a little bit about what the challenges are of serving on a private equity board and how that might be different, just so that the folks can better understand that here.
Yeah, I think, one trade-off people talk about in joining a private equity control board is, will they really have a voice or say as an independent board member when the private equity firm controls they're the majority shareholder and control the vote? And there, I think that while kind of an obvious higher level concern, I think people get through that pretty quickly because most, our firms act in a way of we try to get as much real independent voice in that room and to add value and are always trying to drive to consensus. And I think the benefit that it may be the trade-off with, having, a certain board vote as part of a public company. In a private company context, you get rid of a lot of the process, I'd call it, of public company boards where, it's not about, having the de facto committee readouts, having, the litigation updates, even though the litigation may not matter. And you get stuck in a lot of that process in public company boards, whereas in private, you don't have to worry as much about the check the box governance stuff because the private equity firms are pretty good at that and we can manage it. And so what the board discussions end up being is much more about what we refer to as the WRM, what really matters, in terms of really focusing on what are the day-to-day pain points for management operationally, what are the key strategic decisions that we're going to make over the life of this investment. And that, I think, is a real benefit because public company boards tend to move away from those types of issues, whereas private company and particularly private equity boards tend to entirely focus on those types of issues. And so I think it's a great entree, particularly for folks without a lot of public company board experiences. You don't have to worry about not having that governance experience because we've got that. And what you can really focus in on are the key things to add value to that company.
Okay, David, one of the questions that just came through is about the differences in interviewing for a private equity controlled board and the kinds of things that you're looking for, the kind of hierarchy within the organization, et cetera. Can you just comment on that real briefly?
Yeah, I think it's, well, a couple of thoughts. One is we're not necessarily looking like a lot of public companies for somebody that has prior governance experience, has been a CEO or CFO. And I think, Al, you mentioned this up front. In our boards, it tends to be much more, we start with the notion of kind of diversity. We got to have a diverse slate. And diversity has to, in any profile we're looking for, we need diverse candidates. But you could really dive in, depending on the business. Maybe you need somebody who's really capable in supply chain. Maybe you need somebody who's incredibly capable on digital marketing. And they've got great digital marketing chops. Maybe you need somebody who's very good on product. But you can start with filling much deeper functional expertise to add value that don't necessarily have the governance background. And I think it opens up to a much broader universe of candidates. And, we ourselves have been trying to build, obviously we've been working with organizations like yours and others that have access to common databases of diverse candidates for boards. I think, one would be also the Diligent Boards, their Modern Leadership Initiative. There's others as well, but we've got our own right now, a proprietary database at TPG. I think it's about 1,400 board candidates, diverse board candidates we're tracking. And as we see, board positions open up, we can tie what we're looking for in terms of some functional expertise there to that, pool of candidates. And once again, we're not perfect at it, but we're getting better.
Perfect. Thank you. Wes, we'll go to you next. What are you looking for when you're trying to recruit for board members on your portfolio companies?
Sure. I'll try and boil it down to kind of 3 high-level things. And the first is kind of what David alluded to is, when we're looking to bring somebody onto a board for one of our businesses, there's a specific need or set of capabilities or in-market experience that we're looking to bring to the team, and that is very specific to that investment and that company, and it's really aligned along maybe pain points, as David said. Often it's aligned around what is our investment thesis for that business and what do we need to do to accomplish that, and how can we look to fill that need. And it may be something that the management team may be strong in some areas but not in others. It may be customer relationships that they bring to the table, and so but there's a specific need that we're looking to fill when seeking a board member. 2, it's really strategic thinking. A real example of a track record of defining a strategy in a past life, and that doesn't mean that they need to be the CEO. They could have done that within a division. They could have done that within a certain realm of functional expertise, but really setting and defining a strategy. We've got plenty of people that can do financial analysis and know the capital markets and all those. The private equity firm, we bring a lot of that to the table, and so we're really looking for strategic thinkers and independent strategic thinkers that can help us think of new paths for the company and help the management teams execute those as well. And then 3rd, it's the softer interpersonal skills. Different firms have different approaches to this. I know the firms on this call really take a partnership approach that Nancy described, and trying to work with our management teams. We try and we work with our management teams. We don't have the view that our management teams work for us, and it's important that people that we bring into the boardroom have that mindset as well. The management team runs the company. We're there to support them, to help them achieve our joint objectives, but we're not there to run the company. And so a lot of high-flying, successful individuals with a lot of great background and expertise. Some of them, it's hard for them to sit in a boardroom and not be telling people what to do and how to go do things. And so making sure that you have those soft skills to fit with that philosophy, we have with our investments, as well as to fit with the management teams, and the personalities of the management teams can differ, but a good fit there is also important. And so if I were to boil it down, I would say those 3 things are probably most important for us: specific need, strategic mindset, and the right interpersonal and fit skills.
Great. Thank you. Incredibly helpful. Nancy, what do you think LCDA can do to better prepare its membership for PE board service? What kinds of things do you think would be helpful here?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say, I think, well, number one, I mean, and we can talk about this more in a bit, but I do think that networking and relationship building to just find the board opportunities is kind of step 1. I think number 2, and this kind of fits with what you just heard from Wes and David, which is similar to how KKR thinks about it as well. I mean, we are looking for, in every circumstance, a specific skill set for a specific board seat, and we're obviously adding multiple board members with each portfolio company, but we're trying to solve for specific backgrounds and skill sets. So I'd also just think, I mean, kind of think through what you can uniquely add so that you're able to advocate for yourself around the situations that would be a great fit for you versus not. And look, we always look for people that are excited to not only just be on the board and sit in the board meetings, but who really care and who want to be our partner, who want to be a partner to the CEO and the management team, and people that aren't looking for sort of a check the box experience. So I think also to the extent that you have the time to really dig in and can, communicate that, articulate that, offer that up, that's what we really care about, and that partnership approach. I guess the other thing I'd say is, while we do look for specific skill sets, I think it's also important to not be so focused on the detail when you're in a board level discussion. Sometimes when we have the operators that have a specific background, they want to go so deep in a discussion at the board level, like supply chain, that kind of goes beyond what is sort of relevant for the rest of the board. So just thinking through how you can contribute in the boardroom, and then there may be opportunities outside of the board setting with that portfolio company to either play a mentorship role to people on the team, or to get involved 1 or 2 days a week outside of the board setting. So just thinking through how to kind of present yourself, and sort of what you can contribute at the board level, and then what you're willing to do outside of a board situation. But I also would say, just back to this, like, how do we make this happen? It's just the networking, and we all need to get to know you guys and get to know, okay, this person is going to be perfect in this situation with this CEO. And sometimes it is, as Wes alluded to, this, you find the right person that's just the best personality fit with what the CEO is going to want. And that matters a lot too. So it's not just the resume, which is why I think the relationships matter in terms of making that happen.
So maybe we could, given what you're just saying, Nancy, maybe we could then move a little bit to how your companies would want to engage with LCDA, and what kinds of things you might do to help LCDA create this environment where that networking becomes a little bit more profound and a little bit broader in scope. What kinds of things you think would help here? Because obviously Esther and her team are trying to find, are trying to create a group here that would be an excellent funnel for the things that you are trying to accomplish and the goals for diversity that you have. What do you think should happen here? How can we move this forward in a significant way? And David, we'll start with you if that's okay.
Yeah, happy to. I mean, I think, part of it is, if I had to interact with the LCDA, of knowing each of the firm's kind of respective investment areas, kind of what are the industries of focus, and also thinking about stage of company and how that ties to interest level back within your network, where, a minority investment in a high growth business is very different than a buyout of a mature, steady state type company. And so trying to match people's backgrounds in terms of area of their own professional career, as well as area of interest of the company that they want to be involved with, I think is helpful. And it's Nancy's point. I mean, sometimes things get lost in these databases, and if
Right.
there are more personal ways of connecting and attaching an individual to a specific type of company or type of investment or type of board, it's quite helpful, because you can get lost in a sea of resumes. I mean, I think we as a firm, if I have this right, I think we're helping host hopefully the next LCDA kind of annual gathering in San Francisco next year. And that might be a way for us at least to get to know more members on an individualized basis, to help make that connectivity beyond kind of just getting lost in the sea of resumes.
But I think it's an excellent point, because one of the things that organizations like LCDA are good at is creating databases and long lists of people that you should look at. But what you're saying is that's not enough, because we need you to understand a little bit about what we're looking for, so that we get the right sorts of people in. I think that's what I heard you saying.
Yeah, and to Nancy's point, like, what are businesses that people are really going to be passionate about? What types of companies, what industries, what stage of growth, and where are going to people take the extra time outside the quarterly board meeting to really mentor management and work with them on problem solving in a certain area? And so really knowing in more detail kind of, I think, how your how your membership overlaps with our investment areas and the passion points, I think would be helpful.
Okay.
Yeah,
Great.
I can jump in. I was just going to say, I think that would be a really helpful and very practical follow-up, which is just send us your membership list and people's backgrounds and bios. And to the extent people are willing to invest the time to do this, if you can just, also have a little section where you articulate, where you think you're most relevant and where you're most interested, because I've just dumb example. I mean, sometimes you go through lists, you find great people, and then the geography isn't a fit, or they really want to find a board seat which is in this other sector, and you don't know that. So to be efficient with everybody's time and find the best match, it would be helpful for us to know what each of you want to do and what you're most interested in. And then I would say, I know that from when Scott Nuttall, our co-president, was speaking at this 2 years ago, coming out of that, he sent around the list of your membership base, and we ended up adding 3 board members that are LCDA members to our portfolio company boards. So this will continue to result in relationships that build, and then they'll kind of expand beyond that. But I do think back to this, making it a relationship and not just a resume or a bio. I think it'd be really important, even if each of us doesn't have a particular board seat we're trying to fill right now, maybe we or our organizations and other industry groups within our organization commit to just meeting a couple people from LCDA that overlap with our sectors of focus, because you never know where those relationships will go, and they're relevant relationships even if there's not a board seat available right now. So I think having sort of practical goals around that, I mean, certainly it's something we'd be willing to do, and I think it would help progress this.
Yeah, well, and I think importantly there, things work better when each party understands the other party well, right? And having LCDA understand your 3 companies better, and having your 3 companies understand LCDA and what the members really want and are interested in, the skills that they have, I think will be really important, because the depth is important here, right? If it's just a piece of paper with a bunch of names and resumes, that doesn't really carry the day usually. That's not the kind of networking that really sort of closes the deal. And I think that as that happens, it builds trust in the system, so that as you get resumes in, you can trust that LCDA is understanding better what you're looking for and the kinds of people that would fit. I think that's part of what you're getting at here. Wes, any comments here?
Yeah, maybe to put a finer point on it, the 3 things I said, matching for that specific need is the toughest, and that's kind of the screening exercise. The other 2, the strategic thinking and the interpersonal skills, you only get from talking to people. But oftentimes those 2 could fit, but if the first one doesn't, then it's not going to be a great match. And so I know that the LCDA, at least in my experience, has done a great job when we've reached out and said we're looking for somebody with experience in these types of markets, of providing a curated list of people with experience in those markets. That may be an easier one. For more challenging or perhaps more time consuming, not only the end markets or the companies that you worked for, but what kind of initiatives did you really drive there in terms of high growth? And it was probably a mix of both experience and passion. To David and Nancy's point, I'm really good taking small companies and expanding into new markets. I have a lot of experience restructuring a business and taking out X number of plants, or I really have a lot of experience in working with teams to expand internationally. Those types of, it doesn't have to be a long paragraph of everything they've ever done, but really punchy, high level. That's what we would get from Al and his team if we were working with them. They would put a profile together and really try and sum up some of those real initiatives that they're driven, matching the passion with some of that, not only the companies that they've worked at in the past, I think would really take it to that next level and help the match up front, to go figure out if there's a strategic mindset and thinking as well as the interpersonal skills.
Great, thank you. We're going to move into questions here in a moment. I'm wondering if, Nancy, maybe we could start with you. Are there any additional comments that you would want to make before we get into the Q&A session here?
No, just I think I mean, I'm curious to jump into the Q&A and see what people want to cover. I mean, I just maybe reiterate what I said at the beginning. We're so happy to build these relationships and so happy to do panels like this. It's really important to us, and we want to get to know you all personally, so that we can make progress. I mean, we'll benefit. Hopefully you'll benefit from knowing us, but it's a two-way street, and I'm just excited to help answer whatever remaining questions you guys have.
Okay, so we're waiting here to see if there are any questions that come from the floor. Before we go there, maybe one of the. Oh, sorry, Esther. Yes, go ahead.
It's okay. As we wait for questions, and please let me know. Just wanted to let you know this has been really helpful. The real great concrete ideas is wonderful. This is exactly what we were looking for. What we have done some in the past is we've hosted smaller group events with each of your firms with some of your portfolio leads, and bringing those portfolio leaders in contact with some of our members who bring that expertise or have worked in those industries or functional, relations. So we've tipped a toe into this, and obviously we, with KKR, we went to your headquarters office and brought a group together, and then with both Carlisle and TPG we have an annual meeting, and we're able to, introduce you around. But if there's your portfolio leaders that we can have each of you and your colleagues say, hey, let's start with getting to know 5 or 6 people, because I will tell you, this is a very, very experienced group of individuals. So you're going to want more than 1 or 2, because just to get to know them and starting, to build some of those relationships. But I'm curious, in this Zoom environment, and just quickly, of course, David mentioned TPG was going to host our annual meeting this year, but with COVID, we're excited to be in San Francisco, November 3rd through the 5th next year. So we're in fact sending that information to all of our members, and that's going to be an even greater opportunity there. But in this Zoom environment, in terms of, it actually is a two-edged sword. I think it makes it easier to connect with people because we're not all on planes and trains. But are you finding that an effective way to at least start to get to know someone? Nothing replaces the in-person, but I was curious about that.
David, it looks sort of like, go ahead, Nancy, and then David, maybe.
Yeah, well, I was just going to say, yes, it's been really effective for us. And no, it's not quite the same, but I think you can get, 75% of the way there, which is enough to start building a relationship and building trust. So, we haven't yet gotten to a place where we will hire a CEO without having met them in person. We make sure that happens. But look, I mean, we found Zoom to be very, very effective, and we've been able to build many relationships over the last 6 months over Zoom. So, and I think to Esther's point, it's we all have a little more time to invest in that because we're not all on planes half the week. So, I think that would be a great path to getting to know some of the group.
David?
Yeah, I really don't have much to add. I mean, I think Zoom is proven effective as an in-person meeting replacement, and I think you can clearly start these dialogues of getting to know one another via Zoom. And so I think it's an effective medium there. On the other hand, I think we all are probably experiencing overuse of Zoom for things we used to just dial into an audio, or those 6 a.m. in the morning calls or 9 p.m. at night calls. Those I would suggest, let's go back to audio. We don't have to use Zoom all the time. But I think for purposes of getting to know one another, it's working.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think everybody wants to use Zoom for everything, and you don't need to. It's not critical. One of the things I would be interested in hearing from each of you about is non-one-on-one meetings, because most of what you were both talking about, I think, is sort of getting to know an individual. But is it helpful, or have you found it to be helpful at all, to have small roundtables, 6, 8, 10 people who maybe have experience in an industry, or might be suitable for boards, that it wouldn't be the sort of direct one-on-one sorts of conversations, but it might be an efficient use of your time to sort of just get a feel for some of the people. I don't know if you've done any of that or not. I've just experienced it in a couple different contexts, and it worked well, but just wondering if any of you have seen that or would think of it as being useful. Nancy, go ahead.
Yeah, take off mute. Yeah, no, I've absolutely done that, and again, found it very useful. So I think I wouldn't have any reservations about doing a small group over Zoom either. I think it can be very effective, even in building new relationships.
Wes, any comments on that?
No, I have not had the experience to do it that way. I'd certainly like and I'm open to that idea. And I would say particularly if it was around a particular industry of interest, or going back to maybe it's a growth discussion, or aligning kind of maybe from other diverse industries, what, initiative expertise, we'll put it that way.
Okay, great. There are a number of questions here, and I think, Esther, the best way to deal with these specific questions is sort of offline to the group, but a number of folks have had questions about what industries each of your companies are in, so that they could get a sense of whether or not their expertise fits. So I don't know that we need to spend the time doing that here. I think it'd be useful as something to provide to the group after the session, in terms of what the industry verticals are that each of your 3 companies are principally involved in.
I'll just make a quick comment on that. I would say, and Nancy and David, chime in here if you have a different view. Our firms are pretty diverse, and so I think most of us are investing across most industries. But back to an earlier comment of understanding how each of the firm works, there would be different people that cover different aspects of it. I started off saying I focus on industrial. I've got colleagues that focus on healthcare, technology, consumer, and each firm might be set up a little bit differently. But the breadth of industry, it's about finding the right people to talk to within our firms, on those specific industries.
Yeah, I think this will be the last question, but one of the things that people, a number of folks have asked is how is this specific need that you talk about, Wes, and I think each of you mentioned it in different ways, how is that search for somebody who fills a specific need different from just having a consultant working with the company? How do you differentiate sort of consulting versus portfolio company board members?
I'll start, and Nancy, David, feel free to chime in. A consulting relationship, even if the ones that the people that we work with quite frequently, it is a bit of a transactional relationship. There's not there's not really a vested interest. They're trying to answer a question or questions that we would have, or the company would have, on a certain topic. Whereas a board member is much more of a partnership, aligned incentives, and focused on outcomes, and not necessarily just answering questions. And so the nature of the relationship, between any board member versus a consulting providing a service to the company, I think is very different. But Nancy and David, please
Yeah, any comments before we close up here? Nancy or David, if you want to have a final word on that question? No? I'll let David go here.
Yeah, I think Wes said, I mean, it's pretty different in that, I think it's consulting relationships do tend to be more transactional in nature versus kind of long-term kind of relationship building and value add across, a lot of twists and turns of a business over time. That being said, I mean, obviously we're all of our portfolio companies are open to help in all regards. So whether it be great new board members and or consulting firms.
Perfect. So we're just about out of time here, but I wanted to make sure that I thanked you again, Nancy, David, and Wes. I think just incredibly helpful to the membership here to hear from you and to better understand what your companies are doing, the efforts that you're making to improve diversity within both your companies and in the portfolio organizations that you own. I also want to thank Al Prieto and Egon Zender for sponsoring us today. And I want to thank the participants for your attention, your questions, etc. Please fill out the feedback form that will be emailed to you after the session. The only way things get better is if we hear what did and didn't work. So it'd be great to get that feedback. And finally, I want to thank Esther and her team who are behind the scenes here making all of this work. Esther, I don't know if you have any closing comments that you want to make, but we're right on the hour. And again, thank you all very much. I appreciate your time and efforts. Good afternoon.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Well, if any questions came in, we'll share them with the panelists and get back to everyone. We want to make sure you feel like your questions were answered, and we will follow up with more background on just generally what types of businesses that the firms are investing in. As I said, that's very broad, but just to give you some more insight. Happy to do that. And just again, really appreciate you, Professor Alvarez, for working with us on building this questions and for your time. We know you're very busy people. So muchísimas gracias. Thank you everyone for joining.